William Bird, Director at Media Monitoring Africa. William, always good to talk to you. Welcome back to SABC News. I mean, it is quite something, right, to see a journalist threatened allegedly by Stuart Scharnick in a designated media area at the Madlanga Commission.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary turn of events that, at a commission that is there to expose levels of wrongdoing and lawlessness and corruption and criminality, that someone there should then go and overtly threaten a journalist. It's clear from the video footage that seems to be taken by the journalist, Mr. Malloy, as well as the footage that you've got on screen, that he was clearly seeking to intimidate Mr. Malloy, and he was just doing his job. If it had been the case that the commission had said, you're not allowed to take pictures of these people because these are protected witnesses, and then he had gone and done that, then, maybe he'd have some justification for saying, why are you taking my picture now? But the fact is that that wasn't the case in this instance, and he was just doing his job during a tea break and trying to do that. So to be going and threatening a journalist, it's completely unacceptable, and I think we have to then at least commend the SAPS for going in and making that arrest.
And as you say, the journalist, even if they were taking pictures of Scharnick, whether it was him walking around the venue, because we already know who he is and who he's allegedly associated to in terms of people who've come up at the commission. He himself came up just yesterday in Fadil Adams' testimony, right? But ultimately, journalists are not prevented by the commission's rules from, as you're saying, taking pictures of anyone whose identity is not withheld.
Yeah, exactly. The commission's put in place some very particular rules for witnesses who may not be named or identified, and that's fine. We understand that because it may compromise their safety or expose them to extreme risk. That isn't the case in this instance, or at least it doesn't appear to be the case that the commission has ruled on that. But even so, if that, let's say, he was one of those who wasn't meant to be identified, if you are that person, what you would do is immediately go to the registrar or the clerk of the commission and say, I want to bring to your attention, this journalist has been recording me when they shouldn't be recording me. I ask that you take urgent action against them and highlight to them that this is not acceptable. But that would have been a fair and reasonable response. But to go and threaten the journalist just for doing his job is completely unacceptable. The journalists are there. They have every right to be there. We expect them to be there to report on what's going down. And if you intimidate them, you must face the full might of the law, as we hope will occur in this case.
And the journalist that Scharnick allegedly intimidated, in fact, told our Kenny Mapanga that what Scharnick, or some of what Scharnick said to him, was that during this back and forth, that if you want to speak to me in the way that you are, these are his words that he says Scharnick used, let's basically take it outside, for want of a better word. Does his arrest, do you think, take away, neutralize any threat, at least where this particular journalist is concerned? And I ask that with the caveat that one does not want to basically sensationalize what happened, but this is also a man with an alleged checkered past, a criminal past, allegedly.
Yeah, I mean, many of the characters that have been present at the Madlanga Commission are not the kind of people that you'd want to cross, or at least have threatening you, because you may well find yourselves on the wrong side of some kind of extreme form of violence. So I think what might be fair and appropriate for the journalist and his editor and the news organization would be to ensure that they issue a warning to Mr. Scharnick and to say, if necessary, if they feel that he may go further and do that, they can take out a protection order against him. So to give that kind of protection to the journalist. But the reality is, journalists live with this kind of thing every day. They threatened at lunchtime, and after lunch they have to go back and face the person that threatened them. And that's part of doing the job. But it's also why this is really important to highlight just why this is unacceptable, because what they seek to do is to censor and to minimize journalists' ability to tell the story. So what I would also hope would happen is that the Madlanga Commission themselves would raise this as an issue and highlight again, as we saw Mr. Michaels doing, saying this kind of behavior is completely unprofessional, completely unacceptable, and anyone that threatens or intimidates will find themselves are facing whatever kind of charges that they may face for threats and violence and or intimidation. So that you can stamp that out and let journalists do their job.
And there are demarcations at the Madlanga Commission. For example, there is an area where the media and the public cannot go further because that's where the evidence leaders and the commissioners would sit. You've got a demarcated section for the media and indeed, shall we call it, the public gallery in the room. I wonder if, as isolated as today's incident is, because this hasn't happened before, nothing of this scale has been experienced, if perhaps there is a need now for a conversation to manage more strictly the movement of people between, for example, just those 3 lines of demarcation that I was outlining to you?
I mean, I think, these kinds of things are very unusual because courts, and this is effectively, I mean, even though it's a commission of inquiry, it adheres to many of the same rules and principles that apply in a courtroom. And these things, you don't mess with the judge. You'll find yourself in contempt of court without batting an eyelid. So I would hope that the Madlanga Commission, all they need to do is reinforce those rules, again highlight the threat that this is unacceptable behaviour, and if necessary, the judge might seek to say, well, given that this has already happened, even though you've already been arrested, I'm issuing you with a warning that he may decide to say you can't attend this hearing as a member of the public, and only when you're being called on can you actually attend. The judge has got fairly wide powers, I imagine, in terms of saying what Mr. Scharnick cannot do. But part of it will be, I think, and I hope to see the court reaffirming the critical role that media plays and reaffirming what is and what isn't acceptable behaviour, particularly within the realms of that. It's not like this was an outside barroom brawl.
William Bird, always good to have your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us